Hello everyone, thank you for joining the ENGA Report Assessment and Publication webinar. My name is Andrew and I work in the ENGA Report Assessment and Publication team in the Clean Energy Regulator, and today we'll be helping all of you to understand what's new in the 2021 to 2022 ENGA reporting year, as well as providing some technical advice. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, meet and live. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and connection to the land and sea, and the contribution they make to the life of our communities. I extend that recognition to all First Nations people. I also pay my respects to their creation, their customs, and their elders past, present, and emerging. I'm presenting today from Canberra, which is located on Ngunnawal country. I'll start by running through an outline of the webinar before moving on to discuss some of the key technical aspects of ENGA reporting. Then I'll highlight the important points for what's changed in ENGA reporting for the 2021 to 2022 reporting year. I'll look more in depth at changes to Scope 2 emission factors, changes to sulfur hexafluoride and hydrofluorocarbon reporting, decommissioned underground coal mines, emissions estimation methods relating to hydrogen production, oil and gas changes, and changes we've made to the guidance documents available on our website. At the end of this session, I'll also discuss common reporting issues and audit findings, and give you some tips to help make sure your report is compliant with the requirements of ENGA legislation. I'll also be touching briefly on the CERT report. Throughout this presentation, I'll be using a range of key terms. The Clean Energy Regulator, the agency, we, and us all refer to the Clean Energy Regulator and may be used interchangeably. ENGA refers to the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme as a whole. ENGA Act, or Act, refers to the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Act from 2007. Regulations refers to the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Regulations from 2008. Determination refers to the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Measurement Determination 2008. EARS refers to the Emissions and Energy Reporting System. And finally, MTBI refers to Matter to be Identified, which is additional contextual information that must be reported for certain sources. The information covered in today's webinar is supplemented by a range of training tools and written guidance documents, which are available on the Clean Energy Regulator website. Please also refer to our guidance material or get in touch if you have any further questions. You can visit our website at www.cleanenergyregulator.gov.au, email us at reporting@cleanenergyregulator.gov.au, or call us on 1300 553 542. Now I'll go over some of the key concepts relating to reporting under ENGA. The National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme was established in 2007 as a single national framework for reporting data on greenhouse gas emissions, energy production, energy consumption, and other information specified under the ENGA legislation. By collecting a single consistent data set, we are able to avoid duplicated reporting requirements. Data collected under ENGA is shared with specific users as defined by the ENGA Act, and some elements of the data are published on our website in February each year. The objectives of the ENGA scheme are to inform government policy, inform the Australian public, help meet Australia's international reporting obligations, assist Commonwealth, state and territory government programs and activities, and avoid duplication of similar reporting requirements in the states and territories. The ENGA Act establishes the legislative framework for the ENGA scheme and gives the Clean Energy Regulator the legal authority to require reporting of energy and emissions activities. Several legislative instruments sit under the ENGA Act and provide greater detail about corporations' obligations. The regulations set out the details that establish compliance rules and procedures for administering the ENGA Act. For example, the regulations specify the way in which the Act must be applied and the information that must be provided in reports under the Act. This includes details about the activities to be estimated, the way in which a facility can be defined, and the information to include. The ENGA measurement determination describes the methods, standards, and criteria to be applied when estimating greenhouse gas emissions, energy production, and energy consumption. The determination provides information and methods on how to estimate emissions and energy information. The determination is updated regularly to make sure that it remains relevant. For example, in recent years, scientific reviews on how gases such as methane interact with the atmosphere meant that updates were made on how much global warming is performed by methane. ENGEL legislation was then updated with these global warming potential changes to maintain the accuracy and comparability of Australia's national emissions estimates with the global community. The audit determination and the safeguard mechanism rule are also enabled by the Act. The audit determination sets out the requirements for preparing, conducting and reporting on greenhouse and energy audits, while the safeguard mechanism rule sets out the details that establish compliance rules and procedures relating to the safeguard mechanism. As this webinar provides technical advice for reporting organisations, most of the details will relate to the content of the regulations and the determination, and will focus on the changes that apply to the 2021 to 2022 ENGA reporting year. We also won't be covering matters related to the safeguard mechanism in this presentation. For more information on the safeguard mechanism, please get in touch with the agency directly. All sources of greenhouse gas emissions listed in section 1.10 of the determination, along with production and consumption of fuels and energy commodities that are listed in Schedule 1 of the regulations, must be accounted for and reported when they exceed the applicable thresholds. Missing activities, sources or fuels are a high data priority for us. If you'll be reporting different activities, sources or fuels from last year, please provide extra information that explains the change. You can add contextual information to your ENGA report submission by attaching a PDF document before you submit your report. The determination breaks up the requirements for reporting greenhouse gas emissions from ENGA sources into 5 categories that align with the source categories reported under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Fuel combustion includes combustion for activities like electricity generation, transport, petrochemical production, and so on. For each of these activities, you must follow specific procedures to come up with the estimate. In ENGA legislation, these procedures are called methods. You must follow the listed methods to estimate the emissions from combustion of solid fuels such as bituminous coal and dry wood, gaseous fuels such as natural gas and town gas, and liquid fuels such as diesel, kerosene, and ethanol. Fugitive emissions need to be reported for activities associated with coal mining, oil and natural gas, and carbon capture and storage. In general, fugitive emissions are losses or leaks of gases into the atmosphere. Methods for estimating these sources of emissions vary depending on the nature of the operation and whether the emissions were vented, flared, or released through other means. Industrial processes includes mineral industry emissions such as from cement clinker production, chemical industry emissions such as from nitric acid production, and metal industry emissions such as from aluminium production. The waste chapter includes emissions from solid waste disposal on land, wastewater handling, and waste incineration. Wastewater handling methods are further broken down into industrial wastewater handling and domestic and commercial wastewater handling. Together, these emission sources, Scope 2 emissions, and energy production and consumption captures the majority of Australians' energy and emissions activities. Remember, you must report emission sources listed in section 1.10 of the determination and fuels and energy commodities that are listed in Schedule 1 of the regulations if they exceed the relevant threshold. If your fuel is not listed or is below the threshold, you do not need to report it. This includes emissions from agricultural or land use sources of greenhouse gas emissions, such as cows or rice growing. The other situation where you may not need to report on a source of emissions is if the activity was performed by someone who is below the reporting threshold for registration within ENGA. As has been mentioned, the ENGA legislation is amended annually to ensure that it remains current and accurate. The 2021 amendments apply to the 2021 to 2022 reporting year. The changes include new methods for reporting emissions from hydrogen production, expansion of the scope of emissions from carbon capture and storage to include enhanced oil recovery activities, additional sources and methods for fugitive emissions estimation in the oil and gas industry, and updated Scope 2 emission factors for electricity purchased from the main grid in a state or territory. We'll be going through some of these changes in today's session. ENGA legislation is updated with these changes to maintain the accuracy and comparability of Australia's national emissions estimates with the global community, and in order to align the ENGA scheme with the Australian government's implementation of the Paris Agreement. When identifying which version of legislation to look at, simply refer to the Application Provisions section of each legislative instrument, and refer to that version which is applicable for the relevant reporting year. Also, refer to the ENGA Legislative Amendments page on the Clean Energy Regulator website for a summary of legislative amendments for each reporting year. I will note now that further amendments were made in July of this year to the ENGA scheme legislation. These amendments apply to activities taking place during the 2022-23 reporting year, so if you haven't already, now would be a good time to check them out for next year. The amendments for reporting next year include updated Scope 2 emission factors for electricity purchased from the main grid in a state or territory, allowance for the reporting of emissions from consumption of biomethane, allowance for the reporting of combustion of blended gaseous fuels. Previously there were only methods for blends of solid or liquid fuels, the creation of 2 new fuel types for end-of-life tyres, allowing reports to reflect emissions more accurately from waste tyre combustion, and updated provisions for reporting emissions from natural gas distribution networks, leakages of hydrofluorocarbons and sulfur hexafluoride, and decommissioned underground coal mines. Provisions have been included to allow for amendments relating to hydrofluorocarbon and sulfur hexafluoride leakage, as well as decommissioned underground mines, to optionally apply to reports due by 31st of October 2022 for the 2021-22 reporting year. We'll be discussing both of these changes in today's presentation. The full text of these amendments can be found on the Federal Register of Legislation. Now, let's take a look at some of the changes for reporting in 2021-22. We'll begin with changes to Scope 2 emission factors associated with the consumption of electricity from the main grid in a state or territory. Part 6 of Schedule 1 of the Measurement Determination sets Scope 2 emission factors for use within the ENGA scheme by state or territory. The emission factors are updated annually based on electricity generation within each state and territory and interstate electricity flows, using input data from the ENGA scheme, the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, and the Australian Energy Statistics, AES. 2021-22 emission factors must be used for estimating Scope 2 emissions released from energy purchased or lost from the grid for this reporting year. The Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water is responsible for updating these emission factors and will be able to address any questions about how these factors are determined. As mentioned, one change introduced in the 2022 amendment to the determination, which applies to reporting from 2021 to 22, relates to reporting of sulfur hexafluoride emissions, SF6 from electrical switchgear, and hydrofluorocarbon emissions, HFCs, from commercial air conditioning and commercial and industrial refrigeration. The changes fully articulate the Method 2 and Method 3 approaches for estimating emissions of SF6 and HFCs. Method 2 uses a mass balance accounting approach, while Method 3 uses an aggregate loss at emissions source accounting method. The previous methods referred to a document called the ENA Industry Guideline for SF6 Management, which is no longer published. The new methods produce the same estimates as before, and again can be applied from 2021 to 2022 reporting. If you've retained a copy of the ENA guideline and the calculation tables, you can still use these to help your reporting. The other change introduced in the 2022 amendment to the determination, which applies to reporting for 2021 to 22, relates to fugitive emissions from decommissioned underground coal mines. The change relates to the emission factor used in Method 1 for the activity. It's a technical correction which allows for more accurate estimation of emissions from decommissioned underground mines when the mine was decommissioned during the reporting year. In accordance with the application provisions for this amendment, the agency will be applying this interpretation to 2021 to 22 reporting. It is important to note here that most organisations reporting this activity will see no variation from their expected emissions reporting. This year also introduces methods for estimating emissions from the production of hydrogen. An estimate of emissions from chemical industry hydrogen production must be included if all of the following conditions are met. Hydrogen is the main product at the facility. The use of main product here has the same meaning as principal activity that is used in other parts of the ENGA legislation. So you need to ask yourself, is the production of hydrogen the principal activity of my facility? This might be production for export or for use domestically in transport or industry. The hydrogen is for use outside the facility, as opposed to hydrogen produced for later use within the same facility. The facility does not involve the production of ammonia, with emissions reported under Division 4.3.1, and the emissions from hydrogen production have not been reported as part of another activity in the determination. Please note also that there is no threshold for reporting hydrogen, so facilities that meet all of these criteria must report all emissions from hydrogen produced. The methods available for reporting emissions from hydrogen production are similar to those used in estimating emissions from ammonia production. The methods apply an emission factor and an energy content factor to a quantity of feedstock and allow for adjustment based on captured emissions. For ENGA hydrogen production, there is also no minimum threshold for reporting of fuels consumed as feedstock in the production of hydrogen. If no fuels were consumed in the production, for example, hydrogen produced solely through electrolysis, an estimate must still be included in the ENGA report using the fuel type none specified no fuel. The MTBIs for hydrogen production are the tons of hydrogen produced from fossil fuel feedstock, the tons of hydrogen produced from electrolyzers, the amount of electricity consumed for hydrogen production from electrolyzers, and the tons of carbon dioxide recovered and transferred from the facility. If you're producing hydrogen, then regardless of whether you report emissions under this source or not, there are other activities to be reported which are related to hydrogen production operations. It's important to remember that the hydrogen production activity addresses emissions associated with the actual production of the hydrogen. It doesn't address the use of hydrogen itself as an energy commodity. If you produce or consume hydrogen, including in the process of ammonia production, you must report the production or consumption of that hydrogen. Also, if you produce hydrogen through electrolysis, you must also separately report any electricity production and consumption activities associated with that electricity use. Finally, legislative updates for the 2021 to 22 reporting year also included changes to reporting requirements for the oil and gas industry. The updates to oil and gas fugitive emissions amendments were made to bring ENGA into alignment with estimation methods specified for use in the Australian Government's National Inventory Report submitted under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. They also take into account developments in the empirical evidence base regarding leakages from oil and gas operations. The amendments introduce greater delineation of emission sources within the oil and gas production chain. The change in oil and gas emissions sources are illustrated in this diagram, with the previously existing sources shown in blue and new sources shown in orange. The segment of the oil and gas production chain, previously termed natural gas production and processing, has been split into separate segments for onshore natural gas production, offshore natural gas production, natural gas gathering and boosting, and natural gas processing. New segments are also introduced for natural gas storage, natural gas liquefaction storage and transfer, and produced water. There's also been an expansion of the method for estimating fugitive emissions from the transport and injection of greenhouse gases for carbon capture and storage to also include enhanced oil recovery, where it's conducted for commercial reasons as part of oil and gas production. This is a new division of the determination, Division 3.4.2, Transport of Greenhouse Gases, and is divided into emissions from transport of a greenhouse gas involving transfer and emissions from transport of a greenhouse gas not involving transfer. The key decision point here is whether or not the greenhouse gas is not transferred to another person for the purpose of injection. The amendments also include a couple of principles to assist reporters in applying the new sources and methods. Most notably, subsection 3.412, which seeks to ensure that all fugitive emissions are included, but not double counted under the various segments of the oil and gas industry. For example, a piece of equipment may be operated such that it could be classified as natural gas production or natural gas gathering and boosting. it is important that it is included in the emissions of one of these sources, but not included in both. And subsection 3.41a(1), which clarifies that industry terms are to be interpreted with their technical meaning in the industry, and that the American Petroleum Institute compendium terms have the same meaning and scope as they do in that document. This ensures consistency in the calculations and correct application of emissions factors to relevant equipment. Methods for estimating emissions from venting, disposal of gas by release to the atmosphere, and flaring, disposal of oil and gas by combustion, have remained largely unchanged. The new methods introduced by the amendments primarily relate to the reporting of emissions from leakages. Similar to other sectors in ENGA, the sources allow reporters the flexibility to choose from a hierarchy for estimation methods. For a given source in the provisions, Method 1 is the method used in Australia's National Inventory Report, typically applying default emission factors on the basis of throughput for oil and gas through the segment. Method 2 and Method 3, where available, provide for more detailed estimation of emissions by applying emission factors on a per piece of equipment and per component basis. To enable the results of active leak management efforts to be reflected in reported ENGA emissions, Method 3 now typically allows reporters using leak detection and repair programs to apply per component emission factors based on whether the components operate as leakers or non-leakers. And Method 4, where available, provides for the estimation of emissions using direct measurement by reporters. There are additional restrictions which apply to certain oil and gas fugitive emission sources other than emissions that are vented or flared. The relevant activities are onshore natural gas production other than emissions that are vented or flared, offshore natural gas production other than emissions that are vented or flared, natural gas gathering and boosting other than emissions that are vented or flared, natural gas processing other than emissions that are vented or flared, natural gas storage other than emissions that are vented or flared, and natural gas liquefaction, storage and transfer other than emissions that are vented or flared. If a facility chooses to use Method 2 for any of these sources, all other activities carried out by the facility and related to the sources must also be estimated using Method 2. The same applies if a facility chooses to use Method 3 for any activities of these sources. All other activities related to the sources listed here and carried out by the facility are also required to be estimated using Method 3. These changes in legislation and interpretation have resulted in some changes to the published guidance on the Clean Energy Regulator website, which we'll go over now. Because this webinar aims to provide technical guidance for reporting, we won't be looking at changes to the Assess Your Obligations section or the Registration section, just the Report section. The guidance documents on the Clean Energy Regulator ENGA website have been reviewed and updated to reflect legislative changes, as well as adding clarification to existing guidance. Among the most significant changes made to the guidance for the 2021 to 22 reporting year are an updated Method 1 emissions factor calculation for decommissioned underground mines, and a clarification of the definition of energy production of saleable coal on a washed basis in the coal mining guidance, the addition of hydrogen production in the industrial processes guidance, a clarification of reportable emissions from legacy landfills in the solid waste and landfill biogas management guideline, and an update to the Methods 2 and 3 emissions estimates of hydrofluorocarbons and sulfur hexafluoride gases in the HFC and SF6 guidance. All the ENGA guidance material can be found at the agency's website under the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Forms and Resources tab. And with that, we'll move on from changes to legislation and guidance and into some tips for compliant reporting. Part of a reporting organisation's obligation under the ENGA Act is the obligation for records to be kept. A reporter must keep records of activities for 5 years from the end of the year in which the activities take place, and the records must allow both the reporter and the agency to ensure the reporter's compliance with the Act. These records are likely to involve a list of all sources monitored, the activity data used for calculating reported emissions and energy, documentary evidence relating to calculations including invoices and analytical results, documentation of the collection process for activity data, documentation of the decision-making process behind data collection, including decisions to include or exclude an activity from reporting, decisions on method, decisions on facility boundary definitions, and decisions on the use of certain standards for sampling and analysis. Audits commissioned by the agency have consistently found that organizations that record this information in an accessible centralized format, sometimes known as a basis of preparation, are more reliably able to meet their obligations under the ENGA Act. The Clean Energy Regulator encourages voluntary compliance among reporters and provides a range of guidance material, including this webinar, to help reporters to understand their rights, obligations, and entitlements. The agency also encourages scheme participants to voluntarily notify us when you've identified reporting mistakes. We view this as an indicator of a positive compliance attitude and a demonstration that you're committed to meeting your obligations under the legislation and to providing accurate and complete data. If you notice an error in a submitted report before the deadline for submitting that report, usually the end of October each year, we ask that you contact us as soon as possible. A request to unlock a report must be made in writing. After receiving the necessary information from you, we will open your EARS workspace as soon as possible. If you notice an error in a submitted report after the submission deadline, including for previous year's reports, we again ask that you contact us as soon as possible. After receiving the necessary information from you, we will review your report and notify you as to whether or not resubmission of the report is required. The voluntary nature of the disclosure will be taken into account when considering overall scheme compliance. Every year, the agency assesses submitted reports to ensure the integrity of ENGA data and arranges for audits each year on facilities of interest. Where we discover errors such that the report is not compliant with the requirements of ENGA legislation, we request that the report be resubmitted to address the error. The most common of these issues are as follows. Many of the issues amended by resubmission were for an activity that was not reported, a reportable activity that took place at the facility during the year that was omitted from the submitted report. Again, missing activities, sources, or fuels are a high data priority for us. If you'll be reporting different activities, sources, or fuels from last year, please provide extra information that explains the change. You can add contextual information to your ENGA report submission by attaching a PDF document before you submit your report. Further issues that needed correction were related to incorrect allocation of an activity. This is often a situation where fuel was reported as combusted for one purpose, for example, stationary purposes, when it should have been reported as combusted for another purpose, for example, electricity generation purposes. Even in situations where this doesn't affect an organization's emissions or energy totals, it can still result in a non-compliant report as it affects the way that ENGA data is interpreted by its users. Calculation errors were responsible for some issues, often arising from calculations or spreadsheets not capturing all of the relevant data for an activity. We also discovered a number of unit errors. The most common unit error was mistaking litres for kiloliters in liquid fuels, which can change the activity's emissions and energy profile 1,000-fold. To ensure you're reporting correctly, please make sure you're using the correct materials for that reporting year. In particular, the calculators published on our website, which can be used to assist with reporting for uncertainty, solid waste, and wastewater, are updated annually, so using the wrong version may result in entering incorrect data. Other guidance documents are updated to reflect changed legislation and new agency interpretations. You might also find your reporting simplified by removing elements from EARS which are no longer relevant. When a new EARS workspace is opened for a new reporting year, you will notice that your facilities and activities from last year have been carried over and data set to 0. If you find that certain activities no longer apply, for example, you might have consumed LPG in previous years but not in this one, you can delete this unused line from your EARS workspace by clicking on the X icon. This will delete all data associated with this activity. If you later determine that you do need to report that activity, you will need to create a new activity and add the relevant data. You can do the same for facilities and group members if you determine that you no longer need to report for them, which may be due to a restructuring, a change in ownership, or similar. Again, this will delete all data associated with the entity, as well as any subsidiary entities. Check out the Emissions and Energy Reporting System User Guide for more information on how to do this. And finally, I'll take a brief look at a new initiative from the agency, the Corporate Emissions Reduction Transparency Report, also known as the CERT report. The CERT report has been developed to allow for the reporting of an organization's climate-related commitments, progress, and net emissions position using data that cannot be included in an NGER report. The report allows eligible companies to demonstrate progress towards emissions reduction and renewable electricity targets, as well as what actions are being taken to meet their commitments, including the type of offsets used. The agency uses data from NGER, as well as from the Australian National Registry of Emissions Units and the Renewable Energy Certificate Registry to verify progress towards certain types of commitments. Participation is voluntary and is open to companies reporting more than 50 kilotons of combined Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions a year under the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, which is to say, all those above the NGER publication threshold are considered eligible. The opt-in date for the next report is the 1st of November this year. Investors and the broader community increasingly expect companies operating in Australia to provide information on their voluntary emissions reduction commitments and to demonstrate how they are progressing towards or meeting their commitments. The CERT report aims to meet this demand and thereby support participation in Australia's carbon markets. The CERT report also provides an option to eligible companies to use data held by the agency to verify aspects of progress towards their commitments. The first CERT report was published in July 2022 and included submissions from 23 companies, including AGL, Origin, Woodside, Coles, Woolworths, 3 of the Big 4 banks, and Lion Proprietary Limited. This 2022 report was a pilot, and the first full year of the CERT report will be in 2023. During this pilot, the CERT guidelines and the report itself were co-designed with industry, potential end users, and other stakeholders to improve usability and remove barriers. To ensure we continue to evolve the CERT report, the agency has held several rounds of public consultation, the most recent of which closed on September 26th. For now, the important dates for the 2023 report are the 1 November opt-in date and the March 2023 reporting deadline. If you use the QR code here, it will take you straight to the 2022 report, along with links to the agency's consultation hub. Or you can simply go to our website and search 2022 CERT report and public consultation. Again, you can opt into the 2023 CERT report via the client portal from 1 November 2022. And if you have any questions, there is a dedicated email address, cert-cer@cer.gov.au. Finally, if you do have a question relating to NGER reporting, we recommend you check out the supporting materials available on our website first. We have guidance documents, calculators, and a handy page of frequently asked questions. And of course, if you still have a question, please email us on reporting@cleanenergyregulator.gov.au, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you once again for watching. Again, you're always welcome to contact us directly. You can visit our website at www.cleanenergyregulator.gov.au, email us at reporting@cleanenergyregulator.gov.au, or call us on 1300 553 542. Thank you very much.